Everything okay?
Yeah, track limits at turn 4.
Am I out?
Yeah, lap time is deleted, P16.
Can a simple radio communication reveal more about a pilot than a whole season? What we listened to Hamilton in Spa was shocking, but what he did not say was even more revealing. The 2025 Belgium Grand Prix represented much more than a simple date on the calendar for Lewis Hamilton. It was a fire test, a thermometer to measure the true scope of its integration with Ferrari. It came from a string of mixed results, where the signs of progress were constantly overshadowed by strategic failures, execution errors, and a persistent feeling that the SF25 still did not find its true competitive rhythm. Belgium should be the great turning point. The hopes were deposited in a series of aerodynamic improvements that, according to Ferrari, could transform the car into a more stable machine and with better traction in high-speed curves, essential characteristics in a layout such as Spa-Francorchamps. From Friday's free training, however, cracks began to show themselves. The car did not offer clear feedback, the balance was inconsistent, and the climatic conditions made it impossible to find a definitive configuration. Hamilton, accustomed to adapting his style to the limit of the car, was in an unusually uncomfortable position. Fast curves, particularly the dreaded Eau Rouge Radelen section, required absolute confidence. But what the SF25 offered was uncertainty. The first great symptom that this would not be a normal weekend came during the classification for the sprint. In his most decisive return, when he needed a precise execution, the car betrayed him or he betrayed himself. A spin in curve 18 not only cost him time, but marked an unexpected psychological blow. Hamilton described him as an unprecedented error in his career. The phrase rumbled, "Something like that had never happened to me." This detail is not less. That a pilot with more than 300 large awards behind him declares a total loss of control as something unpublished indicates an alarming disconnection between man and machine. It ended in 18 on a track where the overface is not simple, which totally compromised its participation in the sprint race. And on Saturday he offered no relief. He barely managed to climb to the 15th position, in a competition marked by an endless DRS train that reduced the maneuvers to simple symbolic gestures of attempt. Everything Ferrari and Hamilton had worked in terms of tuning, simulations and improvements seemed not to translate into any tangible advantage. The moment that completely defined the weekend of Lewis Hamilton was not lived on the track. It was not a failed overtaking or a wrong strategy. It was a dry phrase, a line of communication without any ornament, followed by one of the most shocking silences of the year. In full classification on Saturday, after a return that in theory assured him the pass to the next round, the decision of the commissioners reversed the entire panorama. Hamilton had exceeded the track limits in the Radelen curve. His time was cancelled. He went from being inside the top to be eliminated in Q1. The message came through the radio channel, "Track limits, eliminated time, P16. There were no shouts. There were no reproaches. Only Riccardo Adami's voice transmitting a hard fact with mathematical coldness. And then nothing. Hamilton did not respond. He did not ask for clarifications. He did not express anger, frustration, or disappointment. He was silent. But that silence was not empty. It was dense, uncomfortable, loaded with everything he did not say. In the universe of Formula One, where every second communication is usually loaded with intensity, explanations, corrections, or until immediate complaints, the absolute mutism of Heptacampion rumbled as a repressed cry. It was a momentary, but revealing emotional disconnection. That moment captured an overwhelmed Hamilton, not for a punctual failure, but for the accumulation of frustrations that had been dragging since the beginning of the season. The radio that heard the world was much more than a technical interaction. It was a sound portrait of someone who, for the first time in a long time, did not know what to say. And this is where narrative fracture occurs. Hamilton, always rational, calculating even in times of tension, chose to shut up. A gesture that is usually reserved for the moments when there is nothing useful to add or when the emotional load is so great to verbalize it would make it unbearable. This type of silence has a symbolic weight. It means momentary defeat but also introspection. A pause that implies deep evaluation, a tacit recognition that something more serious is brewing beyond the visible. This episode not only represents a technical anecdote within the classification, it is a symbol of what Ferrari and Hamilton are facing together. A machine that does not respond as expected, A team that still fails to adapt to its star pilot, and a pilot that, instead of finding redemption, seems to walk in the direction contrary to its legacy. But the key is that this silence is not the end. It is an emotional hinge in your narrative. A turning point that could mark the rebirth of its resilience, or its progressive fall in a destructive dynamic if it does not recover soon. Because in Formula One, as in life, sometimes the most eloquent is not said with words. And Hamilton's silence in Spa was a drowned cry that revealed more than 1,000 interviews could explain. What happened after the classification of the Belgian GP was more than a press conference. It was a chamber confession. Lewis Hamilton, the pilot who for more than a decade has dominated holders for his consistency, precision, and technical domain, was human. Very human. Faced with a microphone, visibly touched by the emotional impact of having been eliminated in Q1 for the second time, it did not turn to the clichés that so many athletes choose to protect themselves. He did not seek refuge in the climatic conditions or in technical decisions questionable of the team. It was direct, frontal. He recognized his fault. I have to look internally and apologize to my team because it is unacceptable to be out in both Q1. It is a very, very poor performance of me. But beyond self-criticism, his words revealed a crisis of deep trust. Because a pilot does not break through a single elimination. He breaks down when he feels that he is losing control over the elements that he normally dominates. The SF-25, far from being the refined tool that a pilot of his caliber needs, was presented as a machine without a soul, unable to respond to his demands, disconnected from his style, from his experience, from his adaptation ability. The frustration did not only come from the performance, came from the feeling that it was piloting in a vacuum, that each adjustment was an experiment without clear results, that each lap was an air shot rather than a methodical execution. The most disturbing of his statements was the coldness with which he addressed the future. When asked if he felt improvements in the car after the updates implemented by Ferrari, he did not bother to clarify, not particularly. It was the same as the rest of the weekend. We made some changes, the car did not feel terrible. It was even difficult for us, we had to put a second game just to try to pass Q1, so it's not great. Those words, which in any other context could sound neutral, in the mouth of Hamilton are an alarm signal. The heptacampion of the world does not need a perfect car, but it does need a machine with clear potential, with direction, with purpose. And what I described was quite the opposite. Uncertainty, dispersion, technical confusion. And then an even more sharp dart, disguised as tactical observation. We have had updates, but I think that is probably all for the rest of the year. And I think the approach now, at least in the factory, is in 2026. That apparently innocent statement is a blow to the very core of the season. It implies that Ferrari has already lowered his arms compared to 2025. That the hopes of real struggle for the championship are not only weakened, but possibly filed. That Maranello's technical machinery has taken a step forward, but already thinking about the car that still does not exist, that of the 2026 regulations. For Hamilton, this is an existential dilemma. Accepting that his 2025 season could have finished competitively in Spa is not only to assume a sports defeat, but to question the meaning of his signing by Ferrari. He arrived as the great bet, like the catalyst that would relive the glory of the Scuderia. And just some races later, he is caught in a project that has gone from hope to technical lethargy. How is that clash between expectations and reality emotionally managed? How is a pilot reconstructed who, accustomed to the struggle for victories, now navigates in the middle zone with a car without future evolution? In this context, the man behind the helmet begins to blur. A more introspective Hamilton appears, harder with itself, but also more alone. The fight is no longer against Verstappen, McLaren, or the stopwatch. It is against time, frustration, and the possibility that this stage with Ferrari, more than a story of redemption, becomes a bitter lesson on broken promises. And that, perhaps, is the most difficult challenge he has faced throughout his career. Because it's not about speed but faith, to believe again, to find a reason to continue pushing when everything seems to push it in the opposite direction. The question that is floating in the environment after this devastating weekend is not just what went wrong. It is much deeper. How much can a champion resist when the surrounding environment is not up to it? When the car, the team, the technical and strategic decisions fail again and again, what is left of the pilot who has won everything? Lewis Hamilton is experiencing something that for years seemed unlikely, a competitive context that does not respond to his talent. And that transforms everything. And this goes beyond technical analysis or time data. Sport is also a soul, it is perception, it is emotion. And today, what Hamilton transmitted was a feeling of exhaustion. Non-physical, unprofessional. but of spirit, to drag an invisible load that wearing it more than any melee fight on the track. The silence on the radio was only the tip of the iceberg. Below, there is accumulated frustration, disappointment with a project that promised more than it has delivered, and an internal struggle between the need to continue believing and the harsh reality that is imposed week after week. And that takes us to you. What do you think? Are we witnessing the lowest point in Hamilton's career, or is this simply a necessary shake before the Great Awakening? Do you think you can get up from this blow and lead Ferrari to a historic comeback? Or do you think that Gloria's dream with the Scuderia already begins to fade? How much more should a pilot endure his size before admitting that he might choose the most difficult path, and that the emotional price is being higher than he imagined? Leave it in the comments.